So hello everyone, what a great panel again, and thank you to the previous panel because I think they were also talking about collaboration and integration because it's the way we make things work in the system. So excited. We've got a real mix of providers, housing, support, specialists. So I think we're going to learn a lot today. So thank you for your time. So we're going to explore this issue of collaboration, particularly how your organisation seeks to work with others to achieve real results. Is it about informal networks, or is it more about establishing formal ways of working? And does our current system support that? So Christine, I'm going to get you to kickstart. Can you talk to us about Multicultural Australia, your experience of collaboration, and what does it take to make those relationships work, particularly for those women from multicultural backgrounds?
Thanks very much, Karen. And I'll just begin by acknowledging traditional owners of the lands on which we're gathered. I just wanted to start by coming back to the theme of the all of us together, and to make the point that when we speak about all of us, we're not talking about a homogenous one group of people, single group of people. And when we think about the systems, there's probably two consequences that flow from that. It's a system that's very much under pressure, and so we go for checklists and systems to be able to deal with it quickly, which makes it very anonymous and depersonalised. And that's what can sometimes happen to someone who's going through a very emotional, traumatic time when they're trying to deal with someone under a lot of pressure. But the other piece in terms of response to that is we go for a whole range of specialist services to try to deal with the various cohorts. And that then runs the risk of silos. And because people are just, again, under significant pressure dealing with a lot of issues and a huge demand, and just trying to manage your space. So at Multicultural Australia, just to give you a very quick synopsis of what we do, so we're the refugee settlement provider for Queensland. We provide frontline refugee and migrant services. About 2,000 to 5,000 refugees arrive in Queensland each year. Within that cohort, there are families who arrive, and we support people right from the moment they arrive at the airports through getting them settled into housing, into schools, those sorts of things. What we often find is that there are instances of domestic violence which don't appear immediately. They kind of come out a bit later in that journey of the 18 months or so that we look after people. Or sometimes the pressure and the stress of the resettlement kind of triggers behaviours which kind of are latent. But we also get within that cohort, we do have, and perhaps people don't realise these, women who arrive with children who are actually domestic violence refugees who've sought protection within their countries and arrived. We also look after unaccompanied minors who come. These are amazing young human beings who some have fled war-torn areas on their own, as young as 10 leading up. We look after them till they're 18. And there's often a range of issues there around sexual violence type histories on their journey. And then as we look after teenagers, all of those issues we spoke about earlier around the issues around porn, around kind of social media and what happens around their instances. So that's to give you the context of the experience that we have in terms of being a frontline case manager service provider to those clients. We do deal with domestic and family violence a lot, and we deal with the risks that flow from that in terms of homelessness a lot. We are not a specialist domestic and family violence provider. And so we act in terms of trying to provide warm referrals, and we do work, we do fantastic work with many of the partner providers across the sector. But we do kind of encounter some of those issues that come up when you are not a human services provider trying to deal with the domestic violence, family violence sector. And if I can give you one example, so where we have instances where we will assist a woman and potentially her children to leave a DV situation, and potentially the DV shelters is the solution to that. We do get them into there, and it's fantastic stuff, but the case manager will often find that they're not allowed access to the shelter for very, very legitimate reasons, because the DV shelter's going, we're supporting that person, but there's a whole raft of other issues that sit around that person: language, culture, mental health trauma from their refugee experience, a whole range of issues that are not being addressed. So it's about those partnerships that we need to work through. Having said that, what we also find often is because we are the multicultural provider for Queensland, that when instances come up when people from call backgrounds come to services and the system is very much under pressure, people will automatically say, look, we don't have capacity, but go see Multicultural Australia. And we'll say, but we're funded to do people in their first arrival, you've been here for about 10 years. And then it's this, there's a thing about trying to help the person, but if you think about the person being sent from one door to the next, we can't help you, but really the specialist provider who will help you is that next door in the midst of trying to deal with that thing. And what we often find is the person will say, this is too difficult, I'm just going to go back and just deal. Because clearly there's not those. So it's just thinking through how we kind of manage that kind of travelling through gates and doors, that we kind of try to avoid that in terms of working together. We're all coming at it with the best intent of the world, but sometimes in our busyness, we create the barriers. And it's just trying to think through having that consciousness and rising above ourselves in terms of getting those responses. The other piece I'll raise too, we have offices in Brisbane, Toowoomba, Rocky, Townsville, so we see some of the rural regional dimensions of this issue as well. And the instances of what you have to respond to. We've had to, in Toowoomba, for example, not only move the victim, the female, out of the home, out of Toowoomba to Brisbane to get her away from that circumstance, we've had to move our case manager as well, because what's happened is he's gone in and out on bail proceedings. He has firstly gone to wherever she was living, but then once we moved her out, started coming to our offices to come after the case manager. So these are the circumstances that we need to think about in terms of rural, regional type responses, and how we need to respond, because we're Queensland, and that's the reality of who we are in terms of where our populations are. And if I can just make a final point about all of us together, is to make that point as service providers, we sit in these spaces and have these conversations and think about them. And I often find myself in social settings, not often, but sometimes, where I'm actually surprised to find I'm in a group of people where this stuff is not front of mind. And that's fantastic for them. But you kind of become the party pooper a bit, because when they ask you what you do and you start talking about this stuff and you're passionately talking about your thing, and you suddenly realise there's silence and everyone's going, right, well, on to happier things. There's a piece about bringing the community with us, because we've talked about how we can't do this on our own as service providers. We can't do this on our own as a sector. This is an issue that's endemic. And the really, really important point that I really need to make, because I'm from Multicultural Australia, is if you look at the census data in Queensland, 1 in 3 people was from a CALD background, multicultural background, and 50% of our community have been born overseas or had a parent born overseas. That's the reality of who we are, and we need to get a whole lot more culturally capable in our responses and recognise that that is the reality of the population, that the people who we're here to serve.
Thank you. So, Carmel, Brisbane Zero. It's a unique collective impact model of sharing information and data to ensure that we have a joined-up approach in supporting the most vulnerable people in our community. We're part of it, so we know how it works. We're very excited that you're going to talk to us about today and let everyone know what do we do as part of Down to Zero, and what sort of impact is it making?
Is this working?
Yes.
Firstly, I wanted to say thank you very much to Mr. and Mrs. Clark. Collaboration is at the core of solving these problems, so thanks very much. Brisbane Zero, everyone talks about the data aspect of Brisbane Zero. Zero actually means that homelessness is a crisis, not a way of life. That's what our aim is, to make homelessness a crisis, not a way of life. The data is actually human profiles. So we, as a collective, there's about 18 organisations across Brisbane who are members of Brisbane Zero, and we know the homeless people that we support by name. And it's very, very simple. We register those people by name and monitor and manage that list. I just wanted to talk a little bit more about collaboration, given that this is the theme, and I think it's a very easy word to say, and people look at it as a noun rather than a verb. It's actually very difficult to do collaboration well. I come to micro projects in Brisbane Zero about 12 months ago. I've got a very new lens. I come from creative industries where I've managed and created, hundreds of collaborations across my career. And what I've learnt being at Brisbane Zero is that the problem of homelessness in this city is so much bigger than I had ever imagined, and has such a diverse population experiencing homelessness, and that's one of the things that Brisbane Zero does very well with the group of organisations, is understand the whole of the population that are experiencing homelessness. And without going into all of the data collection and how we do things, I wanted to talk more about the practical side of things and the understanding that Brisbane Zero and the group that we work with, it's actually a very sophisticated movement in that it harnesses all of the different modes of collaboration. So you've got open collaboration, like today, where we're sharing information, we're sharing stories, and we're all in this together. And then you've got closed modes of collaboration, like Christine was talking about with domestic violence and family violence. Like those collaborative and coordination groups need to be closed for a reason, like there's safety reasons for that. And then there's different types of governance that are needed for the different array of issues that we're talking about. So that might be a flat governance we've set up because we know the data around women experiencing homelessness, and their families and children are falling into homelessness far more than we know. Well, we know now, don't we, Karen? So we have set up initiated a Housing for Women's Safety Alliance. There's so many acronyms in this world, but I got that one right. So we're setting up that alliance, which will be both open and closed as a collaboration, where the specialists, and when I say closed, I mean, you know, the specialists will come to the table and understand the problem, identify the problem, there are solutions for the problem, how do we communicate those problems, and the best people in the room, the brains trust in that room, will identify that from the Brisbane Zero data that we've collected. So the other thing that Brisbane Zero does really well as a group is we fall into three main themes of preventing homelessness, reducing homelessness, and ending homelessness. And each of those areas of work have a number of activities where, again, there's specialist people doing each of those activities and sharing the information about that. So just quickly as an example, I spoke about the Housing Women for Safety Alliance. That would be what we would call a preventing activity, where we're looking at the data around women and forming an advocacy group with that evidence and taking those stories to the hierarchical governance, i.e. the government, and saying, we've got this problem, this is the portrait of people that we've painted that have this problem, these are the types of solutions that we need. I think importantly we need to know that throwing $1 billion at this problem tomorrow is not going to solve it. Collaboration is going to solve it. Information sharing is going to solve it. And then the reducing piece is about the collection of data. And the data is not, as I said, it's not just data, it's actually humans. And what we've been able to achieve with over 3 years of collecting that information, and it's not everybody that's homeless in Brisbane, it's the people that represent or present, I should say, to our service providers, to the service providers that are part of the collaboration. They give their consent for their name to be on the register. They also give their consent, about 50% of people give their consent for a vulnerability survey to be taken with them, and that's part of the engagement process with the support workers. And from that, we can paint a portrait of who those people are, and we have just published the fact sheets based on 3 years of that information sharing across the Brisbane Zero collaboration. So thank you very much for that. And I hope that you can see more clearly who it is that's falling into homelessness in Brisbane through that information. To end homelessness, we believe that we need to scale up the investments in the housing, the support services, and we actually need to innovate with what we've got. As I said, we can't just think we're going to chuck $1 billion at it and it's going to fix tomorrow. It's actually, we need to work with what we've got now, and I'm sure we've all got many ideas about that. So the power of our collaboration.
About that later.
Oh, good. Sorry.
We've got some blue sky thinking happening later on. Look, Carolyn, YFS has a designated, well, you're the designated integration manager. Keen to know, was that developed to manage both internal and external relationships? And what are the benefits that you've seen from that?
Yeah, look, I think it started as an idea internally about how we work better together, how we join things up and deliver services seamlessly to people, because people really need that when they're in crisis. They need a coordinated response, and they need a team, and they need a wraparound response. So bringing all of that together and anchoring it, we identified in our organisation, hey, we do lots of different things, but we could do them better and we could do more together. I guess now we're really starting to look at more and more we've always kind of collaborated out there, but we're looking more and more at what are these integrated responses, who can we partner with, what can we do, well together, who will do what. Integration is really, really incredibly challenging to do. And when I made my notes to talk here, I must have been channeling Minister Enoch, who funds one of the programs that sits under me, because I wrote down weaving, and it is this real weaving together. And another kind of little thought I've had about it is integration is like bringing things together that maybe don't typically go together, or that we don't expect to see together, or that don't fit together easily. And it's a little bit like salad dressing. So oil and vinegar. And if you just bring them together and sit that there, it separates. And integration needs shaking. Things need shaking up. So I guess I would kind of implore everybody working in the community services sector to have a think about whether they're shaking things up. If you're kind of sitting there going, I'm really comfortable with what I do, you're not probably doing integration. Integration is not comfortable. It involves ongoing communication, assessing, reassessing, really high levels of trust. At times you have to accept someone else's, assessment, and a much more open sharing of information. Those things are really critical if we're going to keep women and children safe, if we're going to hold people using violence accountable, and if we're going to resolve the real kind of complexities and compoundedness of homelessness and domestic violence.
I love that analogy of shaking it up. It's a bit of a Taylor Swift song, but that's fantastic. And it's so true. I mean, we are in lots of collaborative relationships. I think we're dating most of you. And it's like dating. You really have to get to know each other. You have to trust each other. You have to take risks. But no, thank you. That's a great analogy. So, Kiana, when we spoke earlier, you were talking about being more strategic and intentional in building an integrated service response.
Interagency relationships, going out to other services, connecting and saying, hey, what are you guys doing? What are we doing? And how can we do this better together? We, I think definitely have made massive shifts over the years from working in that really siloed response. There's definitely still a really long way to go. But that all comes from that interagency collaboration that, everyone and all the other panels have spoken about today. Some of the really, tangible, practical things we've done, the Centre for Women and Co is really fortunate to be the funded service for the Logan Beanley High Risk Team as the Domestic and Family Violence Service. So that's actually a really great example of that multi-agency collaboration. So that's a team specifically designed to respond to imminent risk of lethality for families in the Logan and Beanley region for domestic and family violence. So that's actually a really collaborative effort of the Centre for Women and Co as a domestic violence service, but we have Queensland Police, Corrections, Youth Justice, Health, Housing, Victims Assist. All of those agencies, child safety, really play a key role in us being able to increase the safety of women and children and also increase that accountability for the person using violence. And we've seen really great outcomes. We've obviously seen the 3 trial sites after the Not Now, Not Ever report, but also now that we've got 8 across Queensland and more potentially coming on the way. It shows that a multi-agency collaborative effort works for domestic and family violence. And if we're looking at that, we know also that homelessness and domestic and family violence intersect massively, and I can speak from that frontline work experience that I'd say 95% of the women that I support on my caseload, we're doing a piece of work around housing, whether it's needing to go into refuge, it's needing to sustain the tenancy. They've experienced really significant financial control and now can't afford to actually maintain the property. We're always doing pieces of work around housing, and that's why it is so important to have forums like these to be able to have these conversations around how we can work better together. And I think, we do that as well through the integrated service response. So we lead that for the domestic and family violence sector. So we have, many of YFS's programs attend that. And that's more of a formal space where we say, okay, what are the system gaps? What do we need to look at? Who can we get to present in this forum to tell us about what they're doing? So when we're supporting people, we know who we can refer to and who we can lean on for specialist knowledge. So we know we're not doing it alone, because that's the thing, is it's everybody's responsibility to work towards keeping women and children safe in the community. And I did want to mention one other, example of collaboration that we've done last year. We did a pilot program with Logan Central Police Station for a co-responder model, which is not something we've ever had in the Logan region before. And that was for cases of domestic and family violence. So it was actually a DV specialist embedded in the Logan Central Police Station to support the officers going out to the home and engaging with women that have experienced domestic and family violence to say, okay, let's do this better. How can we make sure that this is not repeat calls for service? And how can we upskill the police officers to better respond so we're getting better outcomes for the people that we're supporting? And that was just a 3-month pilot, and then we're actually really lucky to be funded by Small Steps for Hannah for an extension on that program this year. And now we've just seen a rollout for a 12-month opportunity for us to have that embedded DV specialist with police, which is definitely, we've seen some great outcomes of enhancing responses.
Thank you. That's very exciting, I think, running a pilot and then hoping that we can roll it out across Queensland. Good luck. I'm sure you'll do well. So Rebecca, as a housing provider, it's important for BHC to do 2 things: build us more houses and work with us to help sustain the tenancies of those people that you're supporting. So you've got a big job. So you've got partners kind of at both ends. Can you talk to us a little bit about the partners that you have at the moment in building new housing, giving us new supply, and also how you work with the sector around sustaining tenancy?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Karen. Look, as Karen said, Brisbane Housing Company, I'm from Brisbane Housing Company, I'm the CEO. We build housing. So we're a charity. We have built around 2,000 units of accommodation right across Brisbane and within Queensland as well. The statistics, though, in terms of the people that need housing, what we've done is an absolute drop in the ocean, really and honestly. So whilst we are a developer and we manage that housing and we have very, very supportive management principles, there's 116,000 people who are homeless every night in Australia. There's 550,000 families who are living in absolute housing stress every night, and that's just not being able to pay the rent, not being able to put food on the table, and paying like 70%, up to 70% of your income just on housing costs. And then in Queensland, we've got 50,000 people waiting on the public housing register. So the demand for housing is absolutely huge. And to my way of thinking, we've got to do something as a nation, we've got to do something as Australia to actually address this, and actually address this in a way that provides more housing, because a roof over your head is absolutely essential. It's 100% essential. It's the bedrock. You can't sort of move forward in your life if you don't have that roof over your head. So I think somebody earlier spoke about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I absolutely see housing as fundamental. And crisis housing is important, but long-term, safe, secure housing is what is required. And if we think about women and children escaping domestic and family violence, often the real obstacle in their way is thinking about, well, where do I go? Where on earth do I go? It's not as if you can just leave and then quickly snap up a rental property at an affordable rate. It's not as if you can just leave and immediately get social and affordable housing. It's really, really difficult. And so BHC, as Karen said, like we're a housing provider, but we absolutely have to work with support providers and with people who will give us recommendations and referrals for people to our service. But look, from my point of view, the thing that is absolutely needed is more housing at scale. So when I was speaking before about that paltry, supply of housing that we have, we've got to do something more. So typically BHC has provided housing through grants. We've been given grants from government. We've actually got a really large housing portfolio. We've got about $350 million worth of housing. And as I say, that's terrific. But the scale of the problem is just so much bigger. We actually need to, as a nation, be able to actually move up towards providing up to 36,000 additional homes each year to be able to keep up with the need. So not just to keep an even playing field, but to be keeping up with that need that's ever growing. So quite recently, well actually not quite recently, probably over the last 5 years or so, BHC has been advocating to government for different ways of actually providing housing, because government has got limited funds. There are limited funds to provide additional social and affordable housing. And I'm really, really pleased to say that the Queensland State Government has come out with a new housing fund, which is called the Housing Investment Fund. And we had advocated for this. And what it actually does is it enables us to get leverage through superannuation funds. So rather than it all just being on government shoulders to provide, funding for organisations like ours to build the housing, what this does is it actually enables superannuation funds to come to the party. We can leverage that money. And if you think about it, there's just billions and billions of dollars that are there in the super funds. A lot of those super funds absolutely want to be involved in the provision of safe, secure housing. They don't know how to. They're not sure how to actually do that. So I'm really pleased to say that just recently, in fact, I think it was only last week, we announced a partnership with the Australian Retirement Trust, ART, and that is going to provide the first pilot for doing 1,200 new units of accommodation across Brisbane. Now that's across 12 projects. They're all going to be long-term, safe, secure, affordable housing that's underpinned by superannuation money. The way that it all works is that government still provides a top-up, but it's a top-up to make the financial equation work. So it means there's less money required from government, so government money can go further. I am so excited about this. I've been in the industry for 15 years within BHC and probably 20 years working in social and affordable housing. A breakthrough like this is absolutely what we need, because if you can provide housing at scale, homelessness and housing stress sort of fade, it's never going to fade away, but we're going to be able to house people. Women and children escaping domestic and family violence are not going to have that barrier in their minds. They're going to go, yep, okay, I can go to a crisis accommodation, but then I know that I'll be able to get somewhere that's actually going to be safe and secure long term. So look, I'm really thrilled about that. It's very early days. Queensland Government has been really innovative in this space, and the federal government has actually followed in these footsteps. So where we have a $1 billion fund in Queensland, the federal government also has a Housing Australia Future Fund, which is a $10 billion fund. And we hope to be able to leverage institutional investment through that as well, because it's only through getting this scale that we're actually going to be able to provide that bedrock for people. So yeah, very, very thrilled about that.
I know that you've been working very hard over a number of years for that, so really, really exciting. So look, one of the questions that we've got here is COVID. We all got agile, we all pivoted, we're all doing things a little bit differently. Really interested to hear, and just jump in, what difference has COVID made, do you think, to the way we're working together and perhaps how we're working together more closely with government, which is something that I definitely saw in my organisation. So jump in. Christine.
COVID was the thing that shook us up, I think.
It's
what I'll say as a... What I'll say as a CEO of a frontline service provider was I certainly found we had to suddenly break processes and break rules to be able to kind of do what we needed to do for our clients, which took us to a space which was very much about being person-centred and place-centred and into that. And so, what I say often with our case managers, social workers have a bit of a structured way of approaching their case management. We all do within our spaces. But what COVID did was it actually kind of sent challenges. The world suddenly had to change, where previously people kind of stuck to principle and ideology and philosophy. Suddenly all of that had to go out the door, and suddenly it was about, right, what's the situation in front of us? So I really hope we can keep that frame of thinking as part of business as usual. I think part of the risk is that people thought the crisis situation gave us permission to break the rules and break the processes. And the risk is that getting back into BAU is that we think we don't have that permission anymore. And there's good reasons, very good reasons. There's a lot of thinking and learning behind why those systems, processes around how we do intake assessment and case management and response should be framed. But getting the balance right there, I think, is something that we just need to I think we need to keep that energy going.
Carolyn, how did you go at YFS?
Look, COVID was really, it's really been really challenging for everyone. I guess we're a little bit, it's not quite over, and we haven't quite found the new normal. I guess what it has done is shine a big kind of glaring light on a lot of the deficits or barriers that are out there in our service systems and blockages, but it's also been a time to allow for innovation and exploring how do we come up with really creative solutions to problems and workarounds. And I think it's probably taught us all that we're far more resilient than we may have believed, and that there are creative solutions. I think in the way we've had to, work together but differently, it's probably allowed people an opportunity to look at things through different lenses, because you've kind of had to focus that little bit harder and have to put in a bit more effort to do that joined up work. I guess, it's provided an opportunity where, trying to work alongside someone in this really unusual cyber world or via Teams or Zoom, I guess, that's enabled all of us to take our glasses off and try on some different lenses to, be creative and innovative and still try and solve the problems that were there pre-COVID that just probably look a little bit different now. Yeah, definitely made us shake it up.
And, look, we know that, that we worked together with Micah as the two homelessness hubs and put 1,700 people into accommodation. So do you want to talk a little bit about, we used our register to actually make sure that we had got to everybody that needed to come into accommodation?
The thing that struck me when I was researching what happened with that, when the public health response kicked in, was that within days, over 1,600 people were put into hotels and motels. We solved homelessness within days. And those people that were in the hotels were then assisted over the course of the next 12 months with the service providers, and there was 43 organisations collaborating on that project of getting people safe off the streets. And of that 1,700, over 1,500 were able to stabilise and find permanent solutions to housing from being on the street and being homeless. We solved it. So that's what the innovation piece did. Unfortunately, and I think that's a really positive thing, but unfortunately, I don't think we've carried that on. I think they seem to have fallen back into the old broken ways of doing things. And innovative thinking and creative thinking and problem framing has kind of, we don't have time for it again. And only yesterday I was at a motel visiting one of the inner city motels that we have people going to. And it really struck me that the guy that runs it, when I asked him, I said, how many visitors or tourists do you have in this motel now? And he said, I turn them away. I don't want visitors and tourists here. This is for the women and children. However, the family and domestic violence escapees are actually being housed on the ground level of an insecure motel on a main road. Like, that is not a solution, and that's one of the solutions that came out of the COVID response, is stick people in motels and hotels. It's not a solution. So yeah, I think there's pluses and minuses to that, but it proved we could do it.
Rebecca, do you think it got government thinking a little bit more about investment?
Well, look, I mean, I think that the response from the Queensland Government has been good. And I actually think they are thinking, and I really think that the Minister, Leanne Enoch, is absolutely passionate about this. She's looking for new and innovative ways to do things. And I think she's really very acutely aware that you can't have stopgap measures, that they've got to be long-term solutions. So, to your point, I think that's very, very much front of mind for her. It takes a long time. The development process takes a long time. To actually develop new housing from scratch takes a long time. It's 2 years in the making. So I guess the thing that I would say is that I think what the Queensland State Government is realising is that we've just got to have a rolling program, that it's all about supply, it's all about the pipeline. The issue isn't going away, and we can't just do something quickly and then go, oh, that's that done. It's got to be a rolling pipeline. And I do think that there have been lessons learned.
Kiana, how did you guys pivot, and anything new come out of it?
Well, I think for us, we had to completely change a service model. As a domestic and family violence specialist service that doesn't do outreach due to safety reasons and, prefers to do all of our work face-to-face, that it just wasn't an option. So we had to fully adapt, and for the first time in the operation of our service, we were working remotely, which is something very different. I think, like everyone said, we did have to get quite creative around how we did that. We did a lot of, I think even just for our team to be able to provide that support when we were all so isolated at home, we had to do a lot of team connection, which I think was really important for us getting through that COVID period, but also meant that if we were staying connected as a team, we were still able to provide that quality of support to the women that we were supporting. And we got creative in, we were doing Zoom sessions with children for DV-specific counselling, and looking at, what was appropriate to provide in terms of service provisions. But even in the integrated service response space, we initially, a couple of the meetings got cancelled because COVID, and then when we were like, okay, this is maybe a bit of a long-term thing, I think all of the agencies in the region started to really crave that connection as well. So we started seeing that we were having the biggest attendance at the ISR meetings for our region that we'd seen in quite a while, because everyone wanted to come and everyone wanted to connect and see how everyone was adapting to COVID as well. So I think we were all very much leaning on each other as agencies in the region and going, okay, if anything, we need to up the ante with information sharing, connections, virtual meetings, and also just seeing and learning from each other. How are you guys doing this? How are you, changing your service model to meet a global pandemic? And so it was a really, whilst obviously it wasn't a great experience and COVID has been really, really challenging, it did bring some really beautiful outcomes of that interagency collaboration, I think.
Fantastic. So I just want everyone, we are going to...
Yes, I know we're going to...
I'm just going to do one word. I'm just, look, we've still got barriers to collaboratively working together and integrating very closely. If we're blue sky thinking, just going to get you to give me one thing that we need to do each to blow up those sort of outliers, bring them into the inner circle, and what would it be, Christine? What would the one thing be?
I'm going to go probably weirdly negative, that to recognise that what we're doing is very complex and there is no simple solution. You have to accept that. It's not a reason not to try. There is no simple solution, and because simple solutions won't work, and that's what COVID showed us. They can work for a short time, but they won't solve the problems in the long term. So we frame our thinking around that and how we try to tackle the problems. I think we'll get much further than we have when we talk about just putting in injections of funds or finding quick, simple solutions.
Keep coming down the line.
I would say that I guess with these really complex challenges around domestic and family violence and homelessness, we really all have a stake in that. It's everybody's business. It is everybody's business, and we all have an obligation to make some kind of contribution to the solution. Yeah.
I'm going to riff off that. I think that the community would be, the general community would be horrified to know that Micah alone put people into motels 4,008 times last year. And I think that there needs to be a willingness from the community to see this issue and see housing as critical social infrastructure, just like we see health and education. And that might mean that there'll be new types of housing in your street and in your neighbourhood. And if we learnt anything in COVID, it was about looking after and being kind in our own communities. So I think we need to take that into the community and talk about that when we're talking about homelessness.
A national housing strategy is what we need, and recognition that housing is a human right.
I'm going to say connection. I think there's benefits to connection, whether it's with your local services, specialist services, your clients, your community, everything. I think connection, and we just need to continue moving away from that really siloed response.
Thank you very much. Thanks to the wonderful panel. I think we've learned a lot today. Thanks, guys.
Thank you to our panel. We just do have a gift to give each and every one of you. And we do thank all of our panellists today. As I said, they've given up their time, but also their knowledge to share their experiences, but also their advice. So can we give one more big round of applause to all of our panellists? And that just about wraps it up. I have a few things to say before we do depart. The forum sessions, as I mentioned, will be online in the coming weeks. So please, if there's something else you want to have a look at or something you want to share with a colleague, friend, please do so. The handy guide, of course, is online. It's not going to do any good if it's not out there and in the community. So please spread the word about that, thehandyguide.com.au. And there's also hard copies, as we mentioned, if you do need those. We do encourage you, there's a survey that's going to be sent or emailed out to each and every one of you, and we do appreciate your feedback on the survey. Yes, to know how today went, but also areas that you would like us to focus on or look at or that needs to be heard. So we really appreciate any feedback you can give us in that. A big thank you to Victoria. Where are you, Victoria? Stand up. I mean, amazing. It's just taken on the role. Put together a very impressive list of speakers, and I'm sure, I think Louise mentioned a few sleepless nights, but I know something like today does not just take one phone call. It certainly takes a lot more. So well done. Congratulations on an amazing lineup of speakers. I know you've asked me here just to thank a few people. The hard work of the Planning Committee, who have religiously shown up fortnightly meetings for the last 5 months and contributed in between those meetings. Thank you to Jenny and Leanne, both directors of the Lady Musgrave Trust, Angela from the Department of Health, Suzette, Department of Housing, Sarah from Centrecare, Mary Millie, Rachel Watson, also to all the volunteers, Penny, Lani, Shawnee for their help on the ground, Bridget from the Centre of Justice, and Rebecca Harding from the Department of Housing, being beacons of solutions and support. I think they all deserve a very big round of applause.